I'd like to have you both have a little dialogue now, and Sig, if you'll begin on this question. Which candidate, which presidential candidate, defined the other first? And how did they succeed in doing so?
That's a good question. I don't think I actually think John McCain defined Barack Obama first, per se, because he asked the questions that were important. He asked the press to delve into his history, to talk about Illinois, how he came up through the ranks, how he could afford $1.5 million house on his salary, how he worked with the aldermen inside that cycle in the Illinois political structure. The difference was that the press was not interested. The press was preconceived in the notion that this man should be president, and they did everything they could to help him become one. And I think it's a bad moment in journalistic history today to look back on this election and how they treated the equality and the balance in the election cycle. I think that on the other hand, without defining John McCain per se, I thought that the brilliant part of the campaign for President Obama was in talking about, and from the get-go, making John McCain an extension of George Bush, an unpopular president. He never quite overcame that, no matter what he said. And then they smartly found out that John McCain had voted 94% of the time on those reconciliation bills for the White House. The fact of the matter is, probably 80% of the senators voted 94% of the time, because that's what they call them, reconciliation bills, because they do reconcile. Maybe the numbers are stacked a little more the other way, in terms of the party that you're with and the partisanship of the White House. But for the most part, the battles are done before you get to the final passage. And sometimes what you want most is part of a bill that's got 10 things you don't like that much. It's just part of the deal. That's the way it's done. But I think all in all, the media portrayed John McCain in a whole different way than they did in the primary. They loved him before. He was candid with the press. He was accessible to the press. And they notified him later. And they went after him to a degree that I've never quite seen. There were stories in the New York Times that were flat out false. And they acknowledged it, but they never wrote retractions to it. There were times when our staff and the campaign would meet with the New York Times staff and point out fallacies and stories and the errors that ran there and ask for them to recognize it, and they would not do it. They did not do it. I read the New York Times every day. I think it's the best newspaper in America for different reasons. I think the Wall Street Journal is fast becoming the best newspaper in America for other reasons. They're hiring better journalists, and their stories are more in depth, and it's got a better balance to it. I think that's what happened in this campaign cycle, more to any degree that I've ever seen in a campaign. That sounds like hyperbole, but I've never quite seen it like this before.
Well, I'm not sure that I agree with the Sig's premise, but he was part of the campaign and those are the conversations that were had. I think there are times in the ebb and flow of the campaign, the hurly-burly, the rock-and-sock time in which there are issues that are so transcendent that they drown out the other issues. And in my view, it was the economy, and I don't think that there was much focus and interest other than that. Clearly, there were some collateral issues that Sig and others may have raised, but I think that was the overarching issue. I think with John McCain that the journalistic community was so enraptured, the Straight Talk Express and all of that. Remember, McCain had benefited to a greater extent than any other candidate in the cycle through the primary season. I mean, remember, he was history. He had to lay off most of his staff. I mean, New Hampshire was a slender reed upon which to base, his comeback. And the media was enormously helpful in that, so McCain had benefited from that. The John McCain who ran in the general election was not the same candidate that had run previously. And the great attraction that he had for the media had vanished. Now, in fairness to him, he had a significant problem. I think Sarah Palin, in my own view, was a disaster. I think totally unqualified to be the vice presidential nominee. put my partisan bias into context and you may dismiss it as that. But in fairness, although it was the equivalent of a political Hail Mary, McCain had a real problem. He wins the nomination, but he does not have the energy that he needs with the base that he's got to have to win. If he can't get that base energized, he's not going to win. And so with this Hail Mary, they pull Sarah Palin out. And part of the Sarah Palin story is an enormous success. She generates crowds among the political faithful that John McCain in his wildest dreams could never. She gets the base that had been suspect with McCain. Remember, McCain had voted against the Bush tax cuts. McCain had voted for what I would consider a moderate, imperfect immigration bill that became the antithesis of the Republican campaign strategy. McCain had been a co-sponsor of McCain-Feingold, which was part of the political reform in which the more conservative elements in the Republican Party viewed as political heresy. So how does he get that base that he needs to energize? Sarah Palin did that, and she did very effectively. I think Sig makes a very good point here. I think they handled, the Republican strategists handled Sarah Palin very badly. I think they handled her very badly. I think the way they used her and introduced her to the national arena was a disaster. Mind you, and Sid would know more about this than I, in the heartland of America, there are journalists that do not have, the Pulitzer in the hip pocket for every article that they write. And I think they would have been much better to kind of introduce her in kind of a low-key environment, to kind of let her get her national political legs, for lack of a better term, to become a little bit more familiar with the national issues. And in fairness, no governor in America knows all of the political issues that those who serve in the Congress of the United States deal with every day. The issues are somewhat different. Obviously, you hope that they're fairly well-read and really do not suggest that they can see Russia from their front porch. That certainly is not particularly helpful. And not identify a newspaper or a publication they read. That clearly is not very helpful to establish your national credentials. But I think they handled Sarah Palin very badly. And I think she served the purpose of energizing the base. But in so doing, I think she alienated, independents who really raised, in their own minds, questions. Is this person best qualified to be the next president of the United States if something happened to John McCain? And I do believe, although it was not articulate, I think there was a subliminal issue as to his age. I think that was, the thought of how many people just looked at this man, maybe because of his age, in the next 4 years, become unable to serve the term. And a Sarah Palin presidency, I think, with many moderates, the persuadables, for lack of a better term, was a prospect that was a bit too much to swallow.
Interestingly, the irony of that is that she really didn't energize the base. She got the base talking more, but if you look at the voter profiles, the turnout models, Republicans didn't come to the polls. The turnout wasn't where it should have been. I think in Ohio, for example, there were 24% less Republican turnout in this cycle than there were for George Bush just 4 years previous. The Republicans didn't turn out at the levels that they did in previous elections. That's the real irony to some of this. She became a model for the ultra-conservative element of the party that might have even stayed home to a greater degree, than they did. And she got them out walking and talking and working and becoming activists and giving money to the party. And they raised a lot of money in a short cycle right after she was appointed. But if you look back on this, and I know the pros are studying it now, and it'll take some time before we get all this, but you're going to find out that Republican turnout was not what they expected it to be.